once I heard what the project was, it involved me much more than just signing off on a budget slip.
Take your seatbelt off for me.
I didn't even do that.
Go and take your seatbelt off. Stop! Stop!
At Cal Lutheran, I've not been involved in a student project that took up basically a social genocide or a situation of mass terror or killing. In terms of race, I have not been involved in anything at Cal Lutheran that has taken up issues of race this directly. My name is Julia Fogg, and I teach at Cal Lutheran. I've been here for about 12 years now, and I chair the religion department. You can't encounter this project and not be convicted or moved, or even just as the students were conceiving of the project, it was very powerful.
In our religion class, a project was given to us to confront something that has to do with religion and violence. So when one of the students came to me and asked if I was wanting to be involved in this project, it sounded very interesting and sounded like something that's really going to make an impact on the campus.
I just kind of think that this project should just bring awareness to people. And will it offend them? Probably. Will this probably get us in trouble with somebody, somewhere, somehow? Most likely. But I feel like this is a project that needs to be done.
I'm really excited to be teamed up with very courageous and very intelligent other students in the class. There's about 6 of us now.
We are anticipating people to be a little taken aback by what we're doing because it is so extreme and so out there, but overall I think we're just hoping for people to take a second to think about this and sort of step back and reflect on what we're trying to communicate.
The reappearance of nooses is a haunting reminder of the dark side of American history, when after the Civil War, Black Americans were forced to live in the shadow of the lynching tree. Thousands of human beings tortured and hanged by the neck until dead.
Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze.
My initial role was to become involved after I think the student group had been working on the project for maybe 2 months or so. They'd been going for a long time on this. And they had come to the point where they needed a budget for the installation that they wanted to do on campus. So they were running the project by me for that reason. But as soon as you encounter this project and you're confronted with all that the students were thinking through regarding lynching, the history that they were learning about, in many cases the personal experiences they were sifting through this year, especially with Ferguson, and a lot of the contemporary issues of police and Black youth brutality or stepping out of boundaries. All of that is out there.
An educational experience for both the students doing the project and the California Lutheran university community. So that would be number one. Number two is something that's indirectly related, and that is for students to find their voice and to be able to set their values out publicly on campus and to engage other students, faculty, and staff on what's meaningful for them. One thing that I've learned is how widespread the ignorance is. And so many students have come up to me in the violence, religion, and ethics class, and several students that have heard about the project through me in my other classes have indicated that they know very little to nothing of this history in the United States. Many of them don't have any understanding of how long going this lynching, this form of domestic terrorism was taking place, and many people have not even begun to understand its implications for history subsequently in America because of lynching.
White supremacy is still a thing in America today. It's a structural and it's a cultural, not phenomenon, it's accepted in our society. There's a lot of stigma around Black people still, and if you look at the media, if you look at the news, it's skewed in favor of white supremacy, and that's not okay.
I have experienced it because I came from Yuma, Arizona, which is basically the border of Mexico, so my classrooms had Hispanics in it, and I was the single one in my second grade class, and it was just hard because the cultures are different, and that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that, but just me trying to find my place, it was always kind of a struggle, and everybody, I guess, understood each other a little bit differently than what I knew. I came from a white family with, my dad is a farmer, so he works with the Hispanic people and just a bunch of different people, but I personally hadn't experienced racism ever, and then I started to, and it was just made me feel awkward and uncomfortable, and I don't think it's fair for someone to feel that way because of something they can't control. And so I think it's important that everybody has probably experienced something of that sort, maybe not to the extreme of giving it a label of such horrible racism, but something similar, and I'm white, and that's where a lot of the blame is pointed to, especially with cases with cops, and I've experienced it as well, maybe not as severe like I said, but it still is a number of someone who has experienced it.
I'm a theologian. I'm ordained in the Presbyterian Church. As I said, I work on New Testament texts that condone slavery and tell slaves to be obedient to their masters. I'm pretty familiar with the history of Christianity, particularly in the U.S., where where our country has been involved in perpetuating slavery through biblical sources and biblical foundations. In terms of lynching and the history of lynching, Christianity has a lot to wrestle with, I think.
I've learned that group projects take a lot of work and a lot of organization, and I think I've also learned that you kind of have a lot of hurdles to jump over when you're trying to do something like this, especially since the project has a really big message and is going to be actively happening on campus. I hope that everyone on campus who sees our memorial takes this as a learning experience to sort of just think about all of the lynching victims in America and go forward from this and realize that it was a big issue, and in some places it continues to be an issue, and we just want everyone to be aware overall.
One of my primary concerns, since I wasn't the instructor of the class that produced this project, and I wasn't one of the first mentors that they came to, a lot of my thinking, I said, all right, I'm gonna put my chair hat on, and how do I think about this as chair of the department, and what's my responsibility to help the rest of the community receive this project. One of the ways in which I did that was to talk with the students themselves, the student group All for Justice, and to make sure they understood what some of the repercussions could be. I reached out to the president of the university, to members of our Center for Equality and Justice, not all of them, but individually a couple of them. And in particular, I reached out to our Multicultural Center and talked with them. I didn't really have enough time to make my way around the whole campus and speak to all the people I thought I should have spoken to or wanted to speak to. So that's what I tried to do. I then, as a teacher, I tried to prepare my classes to receive, to have some context for the installation. During civil rights and the lynching, when it was particularly bad and really supported by a lot of the police and the people in their towns and communities, people would picnic after church at a lynching scene, at a lynching site where people were suffering, and participate in that either as spectators, even as participants.
Our society, and Ferguson, Missouri is just one example, continues to struggle with structural violence and structural racism. And so discrimination is built in to the very ways in which we live our lives beyond just individual intentions. And so I think that this is a form of white supremacy, and it needs to be confronted, it needs to be challenged, and it needs to be overcome.
It's really refreshing to see not only did I have this idea, but I was going to get support from my peers and also support from other staff and faculty around campus.
We have considered what everybody might think, and we know that this is going to be a big thing around campus and that it's going to impact people emotionally. But we just hope that with all the emotional impacts, it's going to bring about a positive change.
I'm really excited to see how this campus project plays out.
The installation was for 2 days. On the first Tuesday, I remember, it was my birthday. I sat outside by the installation, and I was committed to be there all day. I had committed to the Dean of Students that I would be available at the installation all day. And so I think Christians have to wrestle with that piece of what we inherit, no matter what color we are, no matter what history we have, but Christianity has done these things. Christianity has also spoken against such things. But it's a lot like Nazi Germany. You have the state church that is instituting some wrongs and terrorism, and then you have other individual groups of Christians who are standing up for God's justice against that systemic wrong. So I think it's on both sides historically. What's very powerful for me are a number of Black theologians and their voices who have come out in thinking through theology and have said we have to think about the cross of Christ in relation to the lynching of Black Americans and how those two things go together and don't go together. Especially James Cone has been very profound and very vulnerable, I think, in the ways that he's explored the cross and the lynching tree and the ways that he's put himself out there and allowed the rest of us to really think about and wrestle with the role of Christianity here.
The California Lutheran University mission statement is really tied to, or it intends for students to become global leaders. And the last time I checked, the globe is 197 million square miles. And my hope is that as students approach that kind of global space, that they would see Kingsman Park as a runway to that kind of leadership by exercising leadership over a small space as a way to practice going out into the world after graduation and exercising leadership more broadly speaking.
Most of the people that I saw coming and going would come to the installation, read the brochures, take a brochure, read the information, talk to others. And then I tried to speak to at least all of the faculty and staff who came along. The students, if there was a student who looked like they were open to having someone approach, then I would offer to speak with them. I have to say, my own experience of being there at that installation was incredibly difficult. It was hard to be there. It was heartbreaking to be there. And as I told Jamin a couple times, maybe just once, I just wanted to cut them down and hold the bodies and anoint them, wash them, and give them a proper honor and burial. And I knew it was duct tape and straw, but the power of that installation was deeply moving.
What I hope to achieve is that we can educate a lot of people and that we can possibly start a trend, maybe, because this project is on the edgier side. So if people see that we can get this done, others might be inspired to go and make the leap to go and do something that might be controversial, but it's really important.
Well, instead of having it seem as like someone is hanging themselves And that's my fear, that people think, oh my gosh, people are committing suicide right here. Instead, that it's a historical representation of something that's happened, and that it not only represents lynching in America, but also racism throughout, not only African Americans, but Hispanics, Native Americans, all that. So I don't want it to be seen as someone actually doing it. I want it to be known that it's historical, but it's still frightening to actually see it rather than either not hear about it or just see a picture in your history book.
I wasn't very aware that lynching happened, and it was such a big time in America's history, and I was completely appalled that in high school I never learned anything about this. And so with this project I have developed a new appreciation. And
when you see crosses everywhere, it represents one man who was also God at the same time, who died for the sins of everyone in the world. Okay? He was an innocent man who died so that everyone else can live and have eternal life and all that good stuff. Happy story. But the horrific thing is he had to die. And he didn't do anything wrong. And he was basically tortured. And through asphyxiation, you basically suffocate when you're out there on the cross. You're basically trying to gasp for air and hold yourself, but you really can't because your hands are nailed to both ends. And then we kind of go to the other side of the coin. We go to people that were lynched. So if nobody wants to see that, if everyone wants to cover their eyes and say, oh no, I forget about that, how can they truly understand the cross? And so that's why both of these forms of punishment,
the most horrific example of human cruelty, something so painful coinciding or coexisting in the same space with something so wonderful like a picnic with family and friends. And I think that would suggest to people the powerful contrast will suggest to people how absurd it was and continues to be that people experience such violence in proximity to people oblivious to such violence.
The image of black men in our society. Not long ago, Newsweek did a whole cover story on it, and I want to read you just a little excerpt from that story. It says, black men are 6 times as likely as white men to be murder victims. They are 2.5 times as likely to be unemployed. They finish last in practically every socioeconomic measure from infant mortality to life expectancy. And some feel that black men in America seem almost an endangered species.
Do I think white supremacy still exists in America? I'm not sure if it exists 100%, but I definitely think that back when lynching was a thing, that white supremacy was definitely a thing amidst policemen and people like that, but I'm not sure if it entirely exists still.
Don't touch me, please. Came over. Not touch me. Damn, man. Alright, stop. Use your hands, buddy. Put your hand behind your back. I can't breathe. 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 I can't breathe.
it kept people in line. It made people fear, oh my gosh, this guy suffered this horrific death, and we're looking up at this guy. And so, as far as religion, it has always been intertwined in religion. As far as this particular form of death.
And most of the feedback that I received was positive in terms of, this is something that we need to condemn, this is something we need to know about, and isn't it obvious how lynching during civil rights time is connected to some of the police actions and brutalities that are happening by uniformed officers against civilians, and especially our Black American civilians. So that was Tuesday. Wednesday, I took all 3 of my classes, to the installation, and it was in a different place. And then the following day, Thursday, Friday, and the next week, I started to hear the pushback of a lot of people who felt very hurt by the installation. They felt that it had been an unthought through, non-thinking, kind of in-your-face, shocking piece of work that many students didn't know what to do with. Some students were confused about. I think it didn't help that there was a context on campus, but there's not a context when it goes up on social media. So when people were viewing different photos on social media, I think that perpetuated the confusion and a lot of anger and some of the trauma that came up for a number of students and for some faculty and staff. So that has been ongoing. On the one hand, we've never had anything like this at Cal Lutheran. And so one of the positive things is we're talking about people's experience of trauma, people's woundedness, people's different experiences of social class and race in this world, of privilege and not privilege, and all of the messiness of privilege. Everybody at Cal Lutheran is privileged, no matter what color they are. But then there are ranks of privilege, right? So, and none of us with our experiences ever comes to an installation like this without connecting on many different levels and then having to figure out what all those levels are. So we've been doing a lot of work. I asked my faculty member to write some bullet points for student affairs to discuss and for other students and faculty to discuss if they needed some background. The student group had created flyers and brochures, and those were available on the history. And then I also wrote kind of a "This I Believe." I believe in Cal Lutheran students, faculty, and staff. And so I tried to circulate that to my colleagues who were looking for some explanation and some way to understand how this installation came to be. I have had more constructive, open conversations about race, personal conversations about race in the last month than in the last 12 years at Cal Lutheran. So although some of those conversations were tense or painful or some were joyful and light bulbs went off for people in those conversations, but I think that's a lot of what I'll take with me. How do you think about permission in a university classroom and on a university campus? And what venue or what protocol is there to evaluate permission to learn?